Hi, this is Madison Leonard, and you are listening to Voice Talks.
What's up, everyone? I'm your host, Zach Singerman. Thanks for joining me, and welcome to Voice Talks. I'm here bringing you the real perspectives of this industry's finest emerging artists, so listen up, because you'll probably learn something. Today, I'm excited to bring you a conversation with soprano Madison Leonard, the recent first place winner of Houston Grand Opera's 28th Annual International Competition for Young Singers. During our conversation, Madison offers me some insight what it's like to sing on some of America's most famous opera stages and to participate in some of the most prestigious apprentice programs. Then we take a dive into technique and talk about something called acoustic tuning. And as usual, I will quiz her knowledge in a game of What the Fach, where we play for a Fach sex change. So stay tuned to see which one of us has to sing an aria from a role of the opposite sex. But first, we'll get to listen to highlights of some of Madison's recent performances because I really enjoy her as a performer, and I should, considering the fact that everyone else seems to as well. What I really appreciate about her artistry is not only her beautiful tone quality and sensitivity to what's dictated in the music, but that as an audience member, I don't need to look at her to understand her emotive intention when she sings. Just like with some of the greats of the past, the drama exists within her musical expression, and only once I open my eyes to observe what she's doing visually am I rewarded with the gift of fully experiencing the scene with her character. So I encourage you to look up all of my guests on either their websites or places like YouTube to get a sense of how the performance is affected when you're able to watch the scene rather than only listen to the music. So I've gathered a couple of clips for you from a recent recital of hers hosted by the Kennedy Center on the Millennium Stage. You'll hear some of Manon's first act aria, Burleigh's Worthwhile, and Puccini's Morire. obviously you're from Idaho. Are you in Coeur d'Alene then?
I am, yep.
Oh, nice. So did you have a personal connection to the opera company there?
Yeah, the last couple years, let's see, it was a couple years ago, they were doing an outreach production of Hansel and Gretel, and like a week out, the Hansel had to drop out of the first performance. So they're like, can you learn it really fast? And it was, in English and reduced. So I was like, totally, and, whipped it together. And so since that point, I've been friends with the director, artistic director, and Aaron Nicholson. He also was a Merola participant a couple years ago, so we kind of made that connection as well. And yeah, he had a nice career and has kind of been a little mentor figure for me. So this last year, he asked me about the Rosina, and I was like, well, it's a little bit outside of my comfort zone, and I'm not sure if I'll be busy. And he's like, okay, well, figure it out, and we'd love to have you. And so things did work out, and I accepted it, and yeah, I'm excited to do it with them. And
that's amazing. Do you have management yet, or are you just representing yourself?
Nope, just representing myself. I would love to have management, but it just has not quite lined up. I got to sing for a big group of managers a couple weeks ago at Des Moines. They were all in to see the shows there, so that was a nice opportunity. But yeah, we're just gonna see what happens.
Ken Benson was there, wasn't he?
Yeah, Ken was there.
He's a good
great.
guy.
I got to do a little one-on-one with him and talk back, so that was nice. He had some nice repertoire suggestions and said to keep in touch. So
yeah, I mean, he's great, and he does those one-on-one consultants with young singers, and he's got such a passion for young singers. It's so cool. He came out of retirement to just come back and represent young singers to help them get. It's really awesome what he's doing.
Yeah, it is awesome, and he's got a killer little roster, and he just seems like a really honest, good guy.
Yeah, definitely. Have you, when you were in Chicago, did you get to see the Ryan Opera Center concerts and stuff?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I went to most of their stuff, and got to see a lot of them do small roles on main stage this year, and I'm super impressed. I actually auditioned for them just last week. So.
Oh, nice. Is that your first audition with them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very cool.
Fortunately, being in Chicago, they've come up to see a couple of our productions at Northwestern, which was cool. So I'm glad they got to see me, do Susanna. That was a nice beefy amount of time. They were sitting in those seats, so that's nice. And it was a good audition. So we'll see if anything happens from that.
That's great. So tell me what you've done as far as young artist programs go, whether they're pay to sings or whether they're stipend or whatever.
Yeah, let's see. I did a little pay to sing Lingua e Canto in Italy. I guess that was 3 years ago now. There was a little Pepperdine contingent of us that all went over there after Heidelberg, which was really fun. Kind of just an introduction to the language and everything. Did some scenes, and then the following summer I did Songfest in LA, which was amazing, and I totally loved. Just obviously emphasis on song, and got to work with a lot of composers and tons of master classes, Graham Johnson. It's just an incredible faculty there. So I always recommend that to young singers, to keep that emphasis on song, when so much of our time goes into operatic stuff. And then last summer I did Merola, which was awesome. Totally different experience, and definitely didn't expect to get in. Actually, when I told my teacher at the time that I was going to audition for them, she's like, whoa, it's kind of big stuff. And I had no idea. I was plugging my stuff into all the Gap Tracker things and just listening to people, all my colleagues, be like, what are you guys applying for? And I had no idea the scale of that program, but it happened, and it was, I felt very fortunate to be with that group of singers. They were all immensely talented, and it was kind of a whole professional, emotional, mental makeover. That whole summer was a huge experience. So
how many weeks is that program?
11 or something, kind of long.
Mm-hmm.
It was a long summer. Cool. Very cool though, and being there, at War Memorial Opera House, listening to the singers there on the stage, and just being backstage when they're calling, Miss Sierra to stage left. I'm like, casual, Luca
Oh my
Pizzaroni
gosh.
and all these epic people right there in the house. Susan Graham. I'm like, it was a total treat just to be there, and working with the coaches that they bring in for that program are astounding. So that was a treat. And yeah, I got some, reviews and more exposure from that experience, which was really awesome. And then this last summer, I was an apprentice at Des Moines, which was great. An awesome company, so small and in the middle of actual nowhere, Iowa, but just a treat. All the people are wonderful, and the singers that they bring in are super talented. And the whole company just kind of feels like a family. It's really cool to be a part of.
Yeah, that's a really rich company to be able to provide so many services to your singers and to bring all the agents out, or at least to invite them out. I don't know if they fly them out or whatever, but I mean,
yeah,
the fact that they have the reputation at least to bring for the agents to come out there and stuff. I mean, and then it's in the middle of nowhere. Do you know how that, is that just a summer? Do they only produce concerts and productions in the summertime, or does it follow normally?
They do 3 main stage operas and then a 4th in the summer. They call it their second stage series, so they'll do it somewhere else. Like this year, they did it in the Science Center. They did Philip Glass's Galileo Galilei, which was really cool. And then in the winter, they'll do another of those second stage series. And so they'll do, this last year, I think they did Vintadiza or something. And then this next year, they're doing another song cycle or something like that, kind of alternative performance stuff.
Very cool. I need to look more into them because I just really don't know that much. I just know a lot of good singers that have gone there and have,
and continue to go, and a lot of repeat people. It's
exactly.
That's always a good sign.
Is that Felicia Moore's second year or something? Yeah. Or maybe it's not.
I don't think it's her second year, but there were several apprentices this year that were there for a second year, and yeah, they really enjoy it. I mean, they just it is a lot of chorus work as an apprentice artist, which, can be kind of tiring at sometimes, but you're also there watching amazing people perform in the principals and like with the auditions and things that, other things that they arrange. There's a lot of other stuff going on for apprentices.
It seems very similar to Santa Fe Opera, what they provide for their young artists and their apprentices. Right. It's like you're in the chorus all the time, but it's an amazing young artist program. You get all this specialized attention with amazing faculty and access to agents and things like that you don't get elsewhere. So very cool.
Exactly. And a lot of people get to cover roles, and you do cover runs of that, and they definitely set you up for a success.
Absolutely. So what would you say has been your favorite young artist experience so far?
Man, for different reasons, each thing has been really valuable and kind of an important thing for my, singer scrapbook of experiences. But Merola was pretty incredible. The grand finale concert, being able to perform, on the War Memorial stage with the orchestra was definitely something I'll never forget.
What did you sing for that?
I got to sing a duet scene from Hansel and Gretel, the little scene leading up to the Sandman, and sorry, I don't know what is going on. Do you hear that? There's like some kind of shaking. Okay,
I don't. No worries. It's okay. My dog will scratch himself and start knocking things over, so it doesn't matter.
Rolling something down the hall or something. Okay, yeah. So we performed something from Hansel and Gretel, a little duet before the little prayer duet. That's what I was thinking. Yeah, so that was epic with the big lush orchestra, and it was really cool. Actually, funny enough though, because the orchestration for that is so tricky. There was a moment that conductor and orchestra got off by a measure from each other for a bit of time, so the conductor had to stop in the performance and be like, measure 78, and then we all got back together right before my entrance. And I learned the hard way the whole don't read reviews and stuff, because there was this review that went out that was like, oh, and the poor soprano singing Gretel missed her entrance, and I was like,
oh, come on,
that's actually not what happened. But that was the day I learned you really can't give any true value to those.
That's amazing, though. I mean, the fact that you took it as a learning experience, says a lot about who you are, and it's a really great sign that you'll have a successful career, whatever you end up doing, whether you're going to be singing at the Met or wherever. Just the fact that you have humility like that. So,
oh, thanks.
Yeah, no, it's very good, because some people get so, even who was it? I don't know. You see all over Facebook, like these famous singers that post reviews of themselves all the time, and that's fine. Yeah. But it's like, if they're looking through reviews all the time like that, then you have to imagine that it's got to affect you. And, rather than just say, I'm not even going to go there and look at them.
Yeah, exactly. That's a little concerning, because that's just going to be a long road. Like, I think there's a balance. Like, you have to, we're in a business where affirmation is important, and you're vulnerable all the time. And especially when you're changing groups of people, and your tribe will kind of change every 6 weeks or whatever. That's important to still feel affirmed in what you're doing. But, I think you've got to seek that in other ways, and also just rely on your own sense of, trust in your abilities to help you sleep at night.
Yeah, so much of it is psychological. Just what you mentioned a little bit ago about, young singers who have dependency on their teachers. They can't go a week without seeing their teacher and stuff. If you aren't psychologically prepared to handle it on your own, then you aren't ready. So
yeah, exactly.
And even Dr. Price told me all the time, like, you are not everything I say is going to be relevant to you and stuff. And you're going to, at the end of your career, you're going to choose a little bit of this teacher, a little bit of this person, and so forth. And then it's going to be your own technique. It's not going to be like Dr. Price's technique or so-and-so's technique. It's going to be your own technique. Technique is what you make it. So speaking of technique, one thing I noticed about your voice is that you truly embody what I think it means to be a lyric soprano. You're not a full lyric, you're not a light lyric, you're a lyric soprano. You're like right in the middle. And so I think the most important aspect about that Fach is, well, it's a couple things, but they're sort of all in like one little box. Beauty of tone, legato. That's pretty much it, I think.
Those are the kings, yeah.
Other than that, it's the theatrical side of things, and you've talked about your upbringing in musical theater and stuff, so you've already had this big appreciation for the stage and acting and stuff. So I'm more curious about how, because when I first heard you at Pepperdine, now I know you said you sort of got the bug after you had started at Pepperdine, but I remember when I first saw you at what we called Music at 3, your freshman year, because that very first one, or those first couple where you hear the freshman for the first time, like all the older classmen, or at least I was, and I know specifically just from talking to the others, like, oh, let's go hear the freshman, let's see, whatever, fresh meat or whatever. And and so I remember, side note, I remember the first time I really experienced this sort of sensation was when Devaney Smith came and sang her freshman year. I was like, oh, she's got some talent. But obviously, like, as freshmen, we're 18 years old. We all have, like, random issues and stuff. And then I remember having the same exact impression with you. With no one else did I have that impression until I heard it with you a couple years later, where it was like, oh, yeah, she's definitely got some talent. So she's going to be something. I'm sad I'm leaving this year, type of a thing. So I forget what you I forget what you sang, an Italian song or something like that. You don't need to remember. Yeah. It's been a while ago, but so from you studied with Dr. Price, and was your overall experience with him just like experimenting until it started to come together, and him saying, yes, that's right, no, that's wrong?
Yeah, essentially. I remember him just basically encouraging the things that were already naturally happening. Like, for instance, we never really talked about breath support. Like, it was kind of a thing that was like cooking along just fine. So that was a thing we didn't really ever have to emphasize. But I mean, I do remember him introducing me to the idea of like appoggio and kind of that, like, that pressure, that good kind of tension, that, give and take in a phrase. So that was new. But other technical ideas that we talked about, yeah, again, there was just kind of inherent ideas of space that I already had. So I don't remember really stressing that too much, besides just, lifting the palate and kind of having that yawny idea of space. Gosh, what else did we discuss? It was a lot of it was just going through new music and more style things from that point forward.
He's super big on languages, of course. So I think a lot of those aspects, just singing in French or singing in Italian or German, you gain a lot technically just from singing something in those languages. So that's good. That's good to be with him. And then so when you went to Northwestern and you had your new teacher, who I already forgot her name because I didn't write it down. So you can go ahead. Yeah. Okay. So what sorts of things you mentioned? What did you say before? Like acoustic balance or something? That was something that popped out.
Acoustic tuning.
Acoustic tuning. Yeah. So tell me about that, because I have an idea of what that is, just not the same terminology.
Yeah, she's she calls herself an acoustic nerd, and like kind of in that zone. So she loves talking about formant tuning and really very, very subtle changes in either vowel clarity, kind of placement of different, consonants, or like thinking about the origin of the sound right at the larynx, and how, just kind of pouring it out of the rest of your mechanism, and how the sound will combine at a certain place in a very specific way. So at certain times she'll be like, okay, I'll sing a note. She'll say, that was pretty, that was fine, but it's missing that kind of silver element, or, she'll use some other kind of visualization. And so she's like, so see if you can make minor changes, whether that's kind of in your throat mechanism or something, or really just thinking about making it a different color, and how that changes, and suddenly it'll kind of lock into a much more resonant space, or an easier, something that feels easier to me. And I'm like, wow, how did that become so easy? Like, well, it's tuned, and it's locked into that perfect kind of resonant area where that format is just lined up. So that kind of, it's very subtle work, and oftentimes there's not like a yes or no, black and white way to do it, but it's more just kind of playing with it and finding different spaces for vowels.
Yeah, I think, teachers go about that in sort of different ways, obviously, but I think, you want to make sure that things like the squillo is there all the time, and you want to make sure that your vibrato stays even all the time. It doesn't get wobbly and doesn't slow down or speed up a crazy amount or something like that. And so I think that's all sort of part of it. You also want to make sure that, like, while those things are happening, you don't lose all the warmth in the tone as well. The singer's format, we talk about formats, and you want to make sure like the fourth and fifth format are ringing above, which is basically the squillo, but also make sure that the singer's format, which is the second, is still nice and pure and round and full and resonant and stuff. So I think that that's very cool to have a teacher like that. There's a teacher in New York, Jack Lavigny. Have you heard of him?
Yeah, I have heard the name.
So he has a blog. Have you seen it before?
Mm-mm.
It's called Tenor Talks blog or something like that. And it's super nerdy, but like during my gap year, I think I read every single post of his, because he's a super old school. His dad was a tenor. He grew up in Sicily. He was around all of like amazing whatever the age is after the golden age, not like when we talk about opera singers, but like the 60s and 70s and 80s singers. Yeah, he was there with the generation after the golden age, and heard people up close. His dad studied with them and stuff, and he talks a lot about formants, and he even goes like the extra mile and puts singers' voices on a sonograph so that then you can hear what their voices sound like without the singer's formant and only the overtones above it. So you only can hear their overtones, which is super cool.
Wow.
And so you should go check that out. Yeah, it's very fascinating. Of course, they're all tenors, and singing tenor is sort of a specific technique because you have to balance chest voice to a really high range and unnatural range. But it's still a lot of the same thing that you experience in other voice parts. How this, as a soprano, you still have passaggio on the same notes that tenors do. It's just from like a relaxed, sort of like a mixed voice to becoming 100% head voice, or however you refer to it with your teacher or whatever. But but it's just really interesting to see and to talk about those sort of things. Getting back to your voice specifically, what I noticed you did really well in, oh my gosh, you didn't sing Adieu, the other Manon aria from that one.
Je suis encore.
Thank you, Je suis encore. What I noticed you did really well in that is, okay, so I'm really big on like parlando sections where you have a lot of words and keeping that legato, and you do that really well. But what I was specifically thinking was at the end you have this really nice portamento. And so I want to know, because some people will spend like years developing a portamento or like spend years developing a trill or something like that. Is that something that you had to do, or is that something that you just like did and it sounded good?
That is kind of a more natural instinct for me. Definitely, it's funny you mentioned the trill. Like trill, like that's something I have to work on like every day. But portamento, yes. If I continue to think like just to keep singing, like don't think about the destination note, but just actually keep maintaining voice, so that if it's on a YouTube and you pause it any little click at any moment of that journey, that it's still singing and it's still your voice, not like, you know, the next consonant necessarily or whatever. So
right,
that is a thing.
I think a big problem, sorry, just to stick on it really quick, I know what you mean, but to articulate it even further, a big issue people have is like, well, I am still singing, my voice doesn't stop. It's like, well, if the vibrato stops, then it's no longer a portamento. So
exactly.
Do you have to think about it, or is your thought just keep singing and you just sing with a really nice natural vibrato, or do you have to think like I have to keep the support and vibrato going?
That for sure. I have to think about that, and because you're right. I like continuing to sing with sound is one thing, but to have the same nice tone with vibrato continuously is a thing that is definitely on my mind all the time. That's like, actually Dr. Price used to call it a razor blade moment, and I can't remember which one of his colleagues used to say that, but like it's just like you'd reach into a bag and if there's a little razor blade, like you got to remember there's a razor blade in there, so you're thinking about it every time. So that's a thing, it's on your mind even if you're really in character and it's a really dramatic moment, like you're still having a little thought there to vibrato consistently. And that's one thing that my current teacher stresses all the time. She's like, really? Singing beautifully is simple. It's a pure vowel, on pitch, in rhythm, shimmering all the time.
Yeah.
So if you just do all those things, then it's really, really easy.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, that's people misconstrue the idea of, you know, vibrato is a natural thing that happens. It is if you're thinking about the things that are sort of unnatural that we don't do naturally. Like, you know, being really tied into the breath or something like that. You know, you're not gonna, or having a really nice free-flowing low larynx, which is sort of all tied into support in a forward vowel, whatever. When those things happen, then vibrato will happen. But it's not like, you know, it's the difference between ha and ha. You know, it's like you have a vibrato that's driving because you're supported into that good tension versus making it happen by jumping your larynx or tongue up and down or whatever. So
yeah, kind of artificial. Yeah. And so if we're thinking of, I don't know, if we're thinking of those things, then it's interesting to think. So many people are like, well, vibrato just happens naturally. I think it's so important to make that distinction. Like, it does after a certain point, but it doesn't. You don't just open your mouth and make a sound on vibrato. Like, you know, that's when people get into trouble. So, true.
My 2 cents. I've given it too often this interview. Okay, so another thing is high notes, because I want to know. Some people have to fight for them. Some people have them and just make them prettier.
Yeah.
Which are you?
Probably camp number 2. I feel like I keep saying that, like everything just comes natural. That's definitely not true, but I do recall my first couple lessons, you know, official lessons in college, just being like, I've never vocalized this high before, and that was a thing that we just kind of kept. We never super pursued that, but he's like, you'll sing up there. And then when I got into grad school, I actually had to sing. We did the impresario my first quarter, and they added in de into my character, the little mad scene, and I just did it, and I didn't really think that was a thing. Everyone was like, "That's crazy. Actually, you shouldn't just be able to sing that." And I definitely won't like live there. That's not rep I'm gonna pursue, but they are just there. It's a matter of sustaining them, making them prettier, making them more balanced with the rest of my range, more consistent. So they don't seem like a totally different person up there, and then a different, totally different sound down below in the range. But
you sound like you're talking about modification.
Yeah, definitely modification, and that's something I'm still learning so much about. In fact, I had a great coach at Des Moines this summer, Eldon Little, who is pretty into that, and especially modifying through upper middle and kind of preparing for high notes in that way. And he uses a lot of like the idea of like or R, or just the not actually saying those sounds, but using that for, I guess, a little narrowing through passaggio, and so that when you get to the top, it just like blossoms.
A lot of people,
awesomely.
A lot of different teachers talk about like the O with the umlaut over it being your high note vowel, which is a very close to and when your mouth opens to sing these high notes, it becomes more of like a which is it's almost an but it's not quite but basically you're saying like
lip-wise.
You're saying like in the throat and in the mouth type of a thing.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's if you listen to someone like UC Bierling, who's like a total technician, you can hear that so distinctly in his voice. Like in the Romeo aria, he doesn't say pare, he says pare, pare. And so it's like, whoa. And you hear it all the time, whether it's an A vowel, an A vowel, or something like that in there. And it just it keeps the warmth. It keeps the scudo and keeps the chiaro very distinct on either end.
Yes,
and I think that's great that you had a coach that was saying something like that, because I am so convinced about that concept. Like, yeah,
and it's a thing that you just don't really know about until you know about it, and then you hear singers doing it all the time. Like, there were just two amazing sopranos at Des Moines, the Nanette that I was covering and the Manon, both young, under 30 sopranos, and I was just like sitting in the corner like, oh my gosh, how are you doing that floaty thing at the end, and how, and they were like, oh, it's easy, you just think of like narrowing through passaggio and the like little vowel, and they're like, oh, I modify all those vowels, and I was like, really? But I'm still hearing, Malie at the top, on an A, and she's like, no, man, I'm not singing Malie. She's like, Mala, and then then you hear the vowels you want to hear, but that's a thing you just don't realize as a young singer. So you're strict, and you think you're stuck to what's written on the page, and it's just not how it is.
Exactly, I know, and I interviewed someone else who articulated it in a way saying like, up that high, everything's going to sound brighter just because the frequency is so much higher. So you aren't going to say like pare, you aren't going to say pare on a high B flat. You're going to say para, because it's going to sound like pare because it's a high B flat. So and if you say pare, it's going to sound like pare, and so you don't want to have that kind of like dentist chair, like zzz type of, you don't really want that in an open throated sound. So, all right, so we've talked about a lot of things. Let me see if there's anything else. Did I see on Facebook really quick that you did the Houston Grand competition?
Yeah, I did.
How did that go?
It was a great experience. They had a couple rounds, in Houston. So I flew down in the fall for that was just their initial audition. And then I was invited to semifinals in the end of January, and there was a group of probably 20 of us, I want to say, for semifinals, and then they invited me to the finals, which was really cool, which meant a couple more days in Houston. We got to stay at this really fancy hotel, and we were all like coming down in the morning for breakfast in these fancy robes. We were feeling on the top of the world. And during that week, we got to coach with several of the staff, the music staff there at HGO, and kind of learn more about the studio and meet some of the studio artists, and it was just a really great experience. And then at the end of the week was the competition, and there were 8 of us in the competition, all different voice types, and the singers were amazing. I knew several of them personally. I had a friend from Merola that was there, Soljan, who ended up winning the Met this year as well. And just incredible singers. And we all got to sing 2 pieces that they kind of chose for us earlier in the week, so we knew what we were singing. And I sang Je suis encore and Emily's aria from Rorum's Our Town, which I love. 2 very different pieces. And they announced winners, 3rd place, 2nd place, and I was like, man, these people are so good. I thought they were going to win. And then the People's Choice and the Encouragement Award. And then they said in 1st place and winner of the $10,000 prize. And several of us backstage did not know how much the prize was. And we were like, dang, that's awesome. And then they said my name, which was crazy. So I went out and I was like totally stunned and completely shocked because I was really in awe of all the singers in the group. And, you know, I got to meet judges and shake Patrick Summers' hand, and, you know, Ana Maria Martinez gave me a kiss on the cheek. It was probably the best night of my life.
That sounds pretty damn good.
Yeah, really, a really good night. And actually my little sister got to be there because she was living in Austin at the time, so she had driven over earlier that day, and she was just like screaming from the balcony, totally proud sister. So it was a very, very cool experience.
So cool. That is amazing. Well, congratulations officially. I had not known that was the result of it. I don't know how I missed that somehow, but amazing. So okay. Cool. It's so cool. Thanks. I like, you know, I feel proud just because, like, especially Pepperdine's such a small community, and like as a senior or a 5th year senior, I guess, and seeing you as a freshman, it's like, oh, she's awesome, she's a Pepperdine. Like, you know, you feel like, even though we weren't super close or anything because we were so far apart, and like I moved on very quickly, you know, it's just, I don't know, I'm very proud. That's very cool. That's very cool.